Hello. Hi friends. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Nilesh. If you want to use large language models locally on your machine and you want to programmatically access them, then this particular video is of particular interest to you. In the previous video, I had shown how to use the Foundry Local service from Microsoft to connect to large language models or to get large language models which are supported by the Azure Local Foundry or Foundry Local and run them locally on this particular machine or on your machine without having to connect to the internet. The only time you need internet access is to download the particular language model, and once the model is downloaded on your machine, you can perform all the operations locally without having the internet connection. So in this video, let's see how we can connect to that particular model which is running locally on the machine using C SDK and programmatically access that and work with the model. I'm going to use a fun application which is called as the impersonation, or to impersonate some celebrities. So we can call this application as a Celebrity Impersonator. It's going to take a tweet as an input. Like, I had this thought in my mind long time ago. I wanted to build a bot or a service which would look at the Twitter and it would do the sentiment analysis of the tweet posted by some celebrity and write a fun reply to that tweet. But then I dropped that idea because some people might take it personally. Now with the local AI, we can do this kind of things and build a fun app. So that's the purpose of this. That's one thing the application would be doing. The other thing is, when we are working with AI is, or generative AI for that matter, it is non-deterministic. So if we ask the same question and we ask it multiple times, the response that we get could be completely different. And it's also human tendency to give a response which is different based on different emotions and situations. If you ask someone how is it working in the morning as compared to the same question in the evening, the response could be completely different compared to how the day goes for that person. So this application is going to incorporate some functionality which includes emotions as well. And the response to the tweet or reply to the tweet is going to have a bit of emotional element to see that it gives a different response. So without any further ado, let's go and see how this application works. I'm going to switch over to the documentation for Foundry Local and look at some of the key concepts which we covered some of this in the earlier video as well. If you would like to know how to set up Foundry Local, do have a look at that video which talks about detailed steps of how to install Foundry Local on the Mac machine. Assuming that you already have Foundry Local, we will have all these things on the machine running. So we have this, what we call as the execution providers, and based on the processors that are available on the machine, the models that can run can include a CPU based model, a GPU based model, or a NPU based model. There is a model cache which contains one or more models which are downloaded locally to the machine. These models are in the format of Onyx, and then we have the Foundry Local service which exposes these models to the other APIs or SDKs, and we can use the Azure or OpenAI SDKs or other SDKs for inferencing purposes. And there is a Foundry Local CLI. We also have the model management. Now to work with all of this, if we go into the Foundry Local CLI option here, or Foundry Local SDK, sorry, not the CLI, we tested the CLI last time. So we are going to use the Foundry Local SDK for this. Now when I go into the documentation for Foundry Local SDK, we will find here examples in the JavaScript and Python language. But I come from a .NET background and I want to work with this using the .NET SDK. So in this, we can see the documentation of the SDK implementation includes C#, but there are no examples for C#. And the reason for that is the Foundry Local SDK for C# and Rust, these two are currently under development. So if we head over to the C# version of this, it says that currently it is under active development and it is not published as a NuGet package. So we can't use this in a traditional way or in a normal way where I can pull this as a dependency using NuGet package manager. We have to reference this in a workaround way, or we have to use a workaround so that we download the code for this, we build this locally until that SDK is available as a public NuGet package, and we will be locally referencing that. So the way this will work is we have a .NET application which will use the C# SDK, which consists of two main classes, the Foundry Manager and the Model Info classes. And then we will use the OpenAI client. So this allows us to have a standard client SDK provided by the OpenAI to connect to the Foundry Local service and then work with the chat completion model. So let's see this in action and see what we have to do. So let me switch over to the Visual Studio Code here. And I have this applications README file which talks about if you want to run this application locally yourself, what are the steps which are required. It's a .NET 9 based SDK, or we are using .NET 9 for building this console application. And then we have this Microsoft AI Foundry Local project from the source itself. So I'm referring back to this particular SDK which we just now talked about, and we are referencing that as a local project. So in order to reference it as a local project, first thing we have to do is download the source code from the GitHub repository, and then we have to add this as a package source, but it will be a local source. So we reference the binary from the bin debug folder. So our local path would be referenced here, and then for any other project references or dependencies packages that we have, we will be referring them locally, or we will be referring them normally via the NuGet package manager. So if you look at the dependencies or the packages that this particular application is referencing, I'm using Spectre console, which gives us additional console facilities, or instead of using just console.out or the standard console with black and white characters, this Spectre console allows us to enhance the console characteristics and the outputs, and we will see how this works in action. The other things are the abstractions for AI, which comes as the Microsoft extensions package, and we are going to use the OpenAI for the inferencing. With that, let's see how the program looks like. So we start by looking at the environment variables to get the large language model endpoint, the service endpoint. This is the endpoint that is exposed by the Foundry Local. So if I go and run this command, which says Foundry service status, to give us the status of the execution of the Foundry Local service, it says that it is running on the localhost 5273 port, and that is what we are referencing here. I've also provided this as a way by means of setting this as an environment variable. So we could also set this so that we don't have to rebuild the code every time. To make it extensible, the model ID as well as the LLM endpoint or the service endpoint can be set as environment variables. The next thing we do is to give the alias or the model ID, or to get this values. This again is an environment variable, or we are referring to the Mistral AI model, the 7 billion instruct parameters. Then we move on to the different moods which are supported. So as I said earlier, the application supports different kinds of moods, and we have joyful, sad, angry, fearful, and the other moods which are listed here. From there, we move on to creating the Foundry Manager or Foundry Local Manager, which is going to start the model using the start model async method and the alias or model ID. If the model is already loaded into our Foundry Local service, it's going to directly interact with that. If it doesn't exist on our machine, it will do the heavy load, or it will do the heavy lifting of downloading the model, loading it into the Foundry Local service, and then providing it back to the manager. And then we have this actual model reference, which is used using the get model info async. And here again, we are providing the alias or the model ID to specifically use the model that we are interested in. Foundry Local, as I said earlier, supports multiple models. So within the same instance of the service of Foundry Local, we can have more than one model running locally on the machine. And then from the manager, we get the endpoint and the API key, which is required for connecting to that model using the OpenAI client. So this allows us to work with already existing OpenAI SDKs for C# and even other programming languages if we are moving to a different programming language like Python. And using this OpenAI client makes it more portable. So this code, when we want to deploy it to a production like environment, we don't have to make any changes because we are using the OpenAI client. Once our local testing is done with the local model, we can then just switch over to the production environment and use a hosted model if we wanted to use a hosted model with the same OpenAI client. So this requires the options as the endpoint, and if it's the hosted one, then it also requires a key. In this case, since the model is running locally, we don't really require a key, but for consistency purpose, I've put the key here. And then we have this welcome message, which talks about what the application is doing. It's a fun way to see how some famous personalities would react to the tweets. And then this is where I was saying that we could use the Spectre console, which gives us these functionalities like markup line. So this will be put as a line. This is similar to write line, but the advantage of using the ANSI console or Spectre console comes where we can have things like bold, underline, and we can also use colors like blue instead of just showing the text in black and white. So we are using these additional functionalities. And then we get into this actual mode where we are asking which famous personality we would like to impersonate. Based on the name of the celebrity, we go and ask for which tweet we want to reply to, and the real magic happens inside this stream and print response. This is where we use that OpenAI client and then actually go and make a call to the local AI or local LLM, which is running on the machine. In order to do that, we also provide certain things to this stream and pipe response. The first thing we do is we set the system prompt. And when we are dealing with the generative AI, we have these different kinds of actors or different settings we can use in order to instruct the large language model to behave in a certain way. System prompt is a way, or system is a kind of message we can provide so that it takes this into account and generates the response accordingly. So here we are saying you are an expert impersonator of celebrities. Always reply in the style, tone, and personality of the requested celebrity, and also use emojis and slang to make it more realistic. Because we are talking about tweet, we are also saying that limit the response to 500 characters as if it were a real tweet. And if the response is too long, truncate it within the character limit. Once we have that system message, we also add the user message. So user message is the actual tweet that is provided, and system message is the way we would like it to be responded. Once we have this, we call the chat completion options, or we set the chat completion option, and we set the max output to the token count as 1024 and twice of that. This is handy if the response is too lengthy and it can't be finished within these many tokens. So setting up or customizing the max output token helps us to extend the number of tokens or the context that is provided to the large language model and the ones that it can output as well. So max output token is specifically for the output tokens. So the response, if it is very lengthy, we want to make sure that we get all the response and it is not truncated. And finally, we call actually the chat client's complete chat streaming async method. And this gives us a streaming chat completion update or completion update as the response, and then we loop over that completion response and we show the response in the green. So let's see all of this in action, and I will switch over to the terminal here. And let's go into our project. How would they react? .NET, and we use the .NET run to run the application. And let's wait for the response. While the response comes, I will go and look at one of the tweet, which is regarding the Melbourne weather. It's been pretty cold. It's a winter time here in Melbourne, and June, July are like the peak winter months. So somebody tweeted about the Melbourne weather recently and saying the wind in Melbourne isn't just strong. It cuts you through, or it cuts through you, and the cold, and it feels like nature is giving you a silent treatment, but with attitude. And there is also a emoji here, and there is a hashtag which says Melbourne weather. So I think this has got all the elements related to the current weather situation in Melbourne, and I want to use this in our example. So I've just copied this whole thing into Visual Studio Scratchpad, and when it comes to specifying the tweet, I'm going to use that as the content of the tweet. So we start by asking which famous person would you like to impersonate today. So let's start with someone who is Australian, because we are talking about Melbourne weather, and I will use Steve Waugh as an example. He was a great Australian captain, and I follow cricket very closely. So let's see how would Steve Waugh reply to this tweet. So it says, Steve Waugh, Australian cricket legend known for his toughness. He responds by having this bat and ball sign. There is also the feast, and he says, Melbourne weather, you are spot on, mate. Melbourne's wind and cold can be real test of your mettle. But remember, it's all part of the adventure and living in this great city. And then he responds back with these hashtags. The first one, which was part of the original tweet about Melbourne weather, and second one is tough as nails. And there are some emojis as well. Let's try with another Australian legend, again from the cricketing side of things, and it would be Ricky Ponting. And this time we are adding the mood into the mix. So how would a person who is in a curious mood respond to this? So he says, mate, that wind in Melbourne is no joke. I felt it cut through me like a sharp knife. And the cold, and it's like nature is giving you the silent treatment, but with attitude. That's Ricky Ponting for us. Let's try a couple more cricketers before we move on to the other personalities. So let's say David Warner, for example, a fearsome batsman, and he says, yeah, that's Melbourne weather sounds like brutal, but hey, I've faced tougher challenges on cricket field. David Warner, cricket, keep going, keep on, mate. So now I will switch over to some other personalities, and the first person, let's say a physicist who was not on the Twitter was not there when he was alive. So Albert Einstein, and Albert Einstein is in a very fearful mood this time. Albert Einstein says, Melbourne weather sounds quite intriguing, don't you think? But if one is to fear the Melbourne weather, it is perhaps due to its unpredictability and intensity. And then we have a situation here, what we could call as hallucination sometimes in the AI models or large language models. Now, because I specified that length as one of the parameter here for the max output token count, and it's taken 1024 into 2, so it will be 2048 as the max token. Here we are getting a lot of hashtags, and I've seen this happening once in a while when this particular application runs. Now let this continue for a while, and we will come back to it once it finishes. The other thing I want to do here is, we have looked at maybe just Australian people, Steve Waugh, David Warner, Ricky Ponting. Let's also explore some of the other personalities once that hashtag finishes, or once that reply to the tweet finishes, and we will see someone like Sachin Tendulkar or Virat Kohli, how would they react, and then also people from other sports like Roger Federer and Serena Williams. So let's say yes, we want to impersonate some other personality, and this time it's going to be my favorite cricketer Sachin Tendulkar. And Sachin Tendulkar says, wow, Melbourne weather sounds like a challenging opponent on the cricket field. The funny part here is all these are hypothetical responses, and I think if these people were to respond, because we said in the prompt that you respond as if they would reply in real, it kind of impersonates that person in real. So next, let's say Virat Kohli, one of the greats of this generation, but he's in a bored mood and he says, oh, you're making it sound like Melbourne weather is trying to give you a cold shoulder. And we get into that tricky situation again here where the hashtags are going to get repeated over and over again. So I will just stop here for a while and come back when this trail finishes with the next celebrity. Let's switch gear here and let's see how some of the politicians would respond to this. So the first person I'm going to try is Donald Trump, and he is in a surprised mood. And he says, believe me folks, I've seen some tough weather in my time, but this Melbourne wind, it's something else. It's like nature's giving you a silent treatment. Well, that's Donald Trump's impersonation for us. Let's continue and see how would Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi respond to this. Modi ji says, I understand your frustration, but remember, nature is not personal. It's just being itself. And we have this nature is neutral and Melbourne weather. Modi tweets as 3 different hashtags related to this. Now, these are current generation of politicians. Let's go and see someone from the past who was definitely not part of the Twitter era, Winston Churchill. And this is how Winston Churchill might have reacted in a bored mood. Ah, Melbourne wind, a fine companion, is it? Cutting through one like a sharp wit. And the chill, and one feels as if nature's herself is giving a stern lecture. So Winston Churchill was known for his oratory, or he was a very good person with words and the English language, and we can see some of that coming through in his reply. Now let's look at the rocket man of India, the scientist APJ Abdul Kalam. And he says, don't fret, my dear friend, Melbourne's weather can be a formidable challenge indeed, but remember that even the most daunting challenges can be overcome with determination, resilience, and positive attitude. Well, Mr. or Dr. Abdul Kalam, as he was called, was known for his foresightedness and being forthright. So this tweet is not a surprise to me. I think he was on Twitter, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see how would Thomas Edison respond to this. And Thomas Edison is in a nervous mood this time. And he says, I've heard about Melbourne's weather, quite intriguing. Really, there is a sneeze emoji there. And then it continues saying, but I must admit, it does sound a bit chilly and windy for my taste. But hey, I've faced much harsher conditions in my lab, so Melbourne's weather is just a walk in the park for me. I hope so. The next person we are going to impersonate here is Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is in a very joyful mood. His reply to that Melbourne weather tweet is, agreed. Melbourne's weather can be quite challenging, but hey, if it's not breaking the internet, it's not worth my time. That's Elon Musk for us. So I'm going to do one thing. Instead of just waiting for all these hashtags to complete, let's go and make a small change to this particular program. I'm going to remove this max token parameter or setting for now, and let's remove the chat completion options from our call to the complete chat streaming async. And let's run the program again with the default settings. So when I run the .NET run again, it's going to load the model, and let's continue with few of the other celebrities from other professions just to see the response to this. So I want to impersonate Shakespeare this time, and let's see how would Shakespeare respond in his best English way. So he says, "Fair wind to thee, good Melbourneian. The wind doth not only blow strong, but cuts through thee like a sharpened sword. And to that the chill, and thou art left feeling as if nature herself is giving thee the silent treatment." Okay, I don't understand all of that, but that's probably Shakespeare for you. Moving on, who should we try next? Let's try a funny character, which is Mr. Bean. How would Mr. Bean feel to this Melbourne chill? And it says, "Quietly sips tea." Mr. Bean understands the Melbourne weather can be quite unforgiving, and his reply is starting with a lot of hashtags here, and that's not really a reply, I would say. Okay, let's try another one. Some characters from the movies. Let's see how Harry Potter would respond to this. And Harry Potter is in a very confident mood this time. Says, "Melbourne weather, that's some proper chill in the air. But don't let the wind give you the silent treatment, mate. Stand tall and let it blow." And then British Grit and the Hogwarts Express are the hashtags. Sounds interesting. Let's move on. And let's say, yes, this time we want to continue with Iron Man. This is how Iron Man would react. "Melbourne, that's the next level weather reporting you have got there. But seriously, I've flown in stronger winds than that before, but I'll admit the cold can be real pain in the arc reactor." Wow. Looks like Iron Man is also impacted. How about Spider-Man? And Spider-Man is in joyful mood. So Spider-Man says, "Melbourne weather, whoa, sounds like a real chill fest going in Melbourne." And then we have got about 6-7 hashtags here with Melbourne weather, Spidey weather reports, stay warm and dry friends, web slinging for fun and profit, Spidey blessings. So it looks like really Spider-Man is enjoying the Melbourne weather than anybody else. Now, I come from a software background, so let's try some of the people related to software. How about Bill Gates? But Bill Gates is in a very sad mood, and he says, "I feel, yeah, wind and cold can be real donor." And then comes a series of hashtags there. Let's see how Steve Jobs would react to this. And Steve Jobs is in confident mood, so he says, "The Melbourne weather, it's a real digital interface designed to test your mental. But let me tell you something, that wind, it's not just strong, it's intelligent. It adapts to your body, your spirit." So looks like Steve Jobs would have really enjoyed this Melbourne weather. Now let's try completely different profession, which is singing, and Michael Jackson in a curious mode. How would he react? So in terms of the emojis, we are getting some musical notes here, and then we get a response in MJ style. "Whoa, that's the Melbourne weather, sounds like intense. I've had my fair share of wind, but it seems Melbourne's got an extra kick to it." And then there are a series of these hashtags again. So that's pretty much, I think, what we can experiment, and we can keep going with this with all the other celebrities that we can think of. But the idea here is, when we combine a celebrity, his persona, and then also a mood associated with that persona, the kind of response that we get from the AI is different. And when I say no, this particular application here, it gives us a goodbye message, which again is based on the time of the day, and it tries to have a bit of fun again. And it says, "Okay, it's time to call a night, but before we go, let's all do midnight dance party. Good night, late night fun." So that was the fun I had building this particular app, which is testing the AI model inferencing capabilities using the OpenAI model or OpenAI SDK, which is used for doing these things like the chat client and the chat complete chat streaming, async capabilities or functionalities. But then we also used the C SDK for the Foundry Local, which is currently under development. I had a lot of fun while building and testing this particular fun app, Celebrity Impersonation. I hope you liked it as part of this video, whatever we demonstrated. Now, the advantage of using these local models or running these models locally is that you don't have to pay for all these model inferencing. If you didn't have these models running locally, then probably you would need Azure subscription or some sort of a subscription mechanism. And every time we connected to that remote model, we would have to pay for the cloud provider or the provider of that model. We are reducing that cost, and this can also be helpful in scenarios where you want to protect the privacy of the data and you want to run things locally on the machine before you actually push things to production. So to save cost as well as to have the security and privacy related features, this could be a very handy scenario to run the models locally and to test those models locally. I would put the links to all the resources that I referenced in this video, starting from the SDK for the Foundry Local, which talks about the JavaScript and the Python SDK, and then also the links to the C SDK, which is under development. You will also find a link to the GitHub repository to this particular code, which I demonstrated using How Would They React application, a console application. And any comment or any feedback that you have regarding this demo application as well as this video, please feel free to provide those comments in the comment section of the video. I hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching this video. Until next time, code with passion and strive for excellence. I will see you on the next videos. Thanks for watching this.